A little pop-up screen should come on telling you that we're recording. And I'm going to put in the chat a little bit of Jim's bio. I think, if I can make it work. It actually worked. That's great. All right, everyone, welcome to White Collar Week's Tuesday speaker series. Our guest tonight is Jim Campbell, a dear friend of mine. I'll get to a formal introduction about him in a little while. I have a few announcements to make, and then we'll get right to Jim. We do this open Tuesday night speaker meeting once a month. On Monday nights, we have a closed meeting just for people who are directly justice impacted. Our white collar support group is at 7 p.m. on Monday nights Eastern and 4 p.m. Pacific. If you are directly justice impacted, you'd like to join us on a Monday night, you can find the information on our website at prisonist.org. Tonight we have Jim. In a month from now, on March 21st, our guest speaker will be Scott Semple, the former Commissioner of Correction of the state of Connecticut, and he's doing incredible things nationally. So that's definitely a must-see as well. And on April 18th, Christopher Poulos is going to be our guest speaker. And Chris has an incredible backstory, including bank robbery and jail. And then he became an intern in the Obama White House and went to law school and heading reentry up in the Pacific Northwest. So we'll talk more about Chris as we get closer to it. March 6th, which is coming up in less than 2 weeks now, in 13 days, is our 350th meeting. And it's incredible that we've been doing these white collar support groups for 7 years. So we just had our 348th meeting last night. And so on Monday, March 6th, our 350th meeting. Information about it is on our website, prisonist.org, and also on our social media and our emails. And we're so grateful and honored to be able to bring that to people who are in need. So if anyone would like any information about it tonight, if you know anybody who you'd like to refer, or you want any more information, just hit me up in the chat, and I'll send you information, or you can find it again on prisons.org. Anyway, tonight our guest is Jim Campbell, and as promoted, Jim is the author of Madoff Talks, a book that I am very proud to have an autographed copy of. And he wrote this book by having an intimate relationship with the Madoff family, and uncovered facts and a way of looking at what happened that no one had really looked at before, kind of a systemic issue with Wall Street and banks and everything, and he'll talk more about that. But of course, if you've seen the Netflix documentary, Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street, which is currently running on Netflix, it's based on Jim's book. And it is a kind of an abbreviated version of everything that Jim goes through meticulously in his book, but an incredible story. And it's amazing how 10 years later, how it's still relevant and a poignant look at excess and how we kind of turn our backs on a lot of things that are happening in the world of finance. Jim's a very good friend of ours. I've been on his radio shows a few times. He's been on our podcasts, and we kind of go back and forth. And I was so happy when the documentary came out, and that kind of led to another opportunity to have Jim on. So without further ado, we have Jim Campbell, our dear friend, and thank you, Jim, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Great honor to be here. And as I've always said, Jeff, you're the walking personification of second chance society in America. And it's been great to watch you grow and, basically turn your life over to service. I interviewed you when you were really just starting out, and your commitment has been amazing. And I got to interview when you got your law license back again, and actually viscerally see what that meant to you. It was a great honor. Now I want to also say that you've been incredible at supporting the book, which came out 2 years ago, and the Netflix docuseries, in terms of promotion, interviewing me, just getting friends to buy the book. It's meant a lot. That's all I can say. And I always say that you're going to be stunned by what you didn't know about the Madoff story. That's probably a little bit less true now if you have seen the docu-series, which came out on January 4th. And a little bit of backstory, both when the book came out and when the docu-series came out, we were sort of blessed with the way that the events happened right before. When the book came out in 21, I was actually leaving the radio station in Greenwich where I'd done the morning show, which is prep starts at 4 a.m. It goes through 9 a.m. So it's very high intensity. So I usually stop on the way home at a convenience place and get a diet energy drink and unwind a little bit. And the last stoplight 100 yards before, across my phone goes, Bernie Madoff passes away, 2 weeks before the book came out. And as I say, McGraw-Hill had nothing to do with that timing, but we were pretty lucky. The book is coming out on the 27th. He died like on the 21st or something. So it was close. And I had 100 more yards to go to get into the parking lot. So no one's heard of the book or me. And between that 100 yards, my phone blew up. I was getting text messages, phone calls, emails. CBS Sunday Morning was trying to find me which has 6 million viewers. And they require, if you're going to come on, that they ice you, meaning you can't do any TV interviews before it airs. So they were trying to make sure they nailed me down before anybody else does. Then I got the New York Post editor called me right after that and asked me if I would write 2,000 words for the next day's paper and that he would tease it on the front page. And I said, I can't, where am I going to write 2,000 words when I'm doing all this other stuff right now? And when he said that he promised he would tease it on the front page, I said, okay, we'll do that. Then I get a call from the Daily News of London asking me who's getting Bernie's body out of the Bureau of Prisons. And I said, are you serious? And then I talked to my editor and my publicist, who's Jewish, and he says, yeah, why don't we go for getting custody and we'll sit Shiva in your living room while CBS films the interview. So the bad news was that CBS comes, they taped 5 hours in my backyard, and they were really nice, and 5 minutes made the show, which is still pretty good. And the segment ends, and by the way, they spend 3 months normally on these segments. They had from Wednesday till Sunday. Saturday night, they were still calling me, working on it. Segment finishes about 9:50 Eastern time. Book is not out. It was about number 879 on Amazon. By 1 in the afternoon, it was number 17. So that's the power of CBS Sunday Morning. But the book came out 2 days later, and Amazon ran out of books 2 days after that. There's no books, and they won't take orders when there's nothing in the pipeline. So on the website is, Madoff Talks, Jim Campbell, unavailable, 2 days. Right below that is a book that looks like the Cliff Notes version of Jim Campbell's Madoff Talks. It's 6 pages long, and it quotes me in my book, and is selling for half the price of the book, and by an author who's using an alias, so we can't even find out who he is. A couple days later, Madoff Speaks shows up, which sounds suspiciously like Madoff Talks. And my marketing person orders the Kindle version. That's 120 pages blank. So right now, we're a little upset. I asked McGraw-Hill, can you go tell Amazon to get these books the hell off there? Said, absolutely not. We sell 80%. They'll squash us like a bug. So nothing that we could really do about it. Good news, though. I had hoped and dreamed that maybe 2 years after the book was out, someone might want to do a documentary on it. Well, we had 4 production companies come to us again before the book came out, trying to buy the rights. And the way it works is the production company comes to you, tries to negotiate a deal to get the rights, and then they go find a streamer or a network or a studio to fund it. So I had to get an agent out in Hollywood at Creative Artists, which is the biggest one there. And I got a great agent. She says, we're not going to bother with the production companies. We're going to go negotiate directly with Netflix, which is kind of unheard of. And she said, we're going to get you the best director and the best deal. And lo and behold, they came through with that. Joe Berlinger is the director. He's the #1 true crime director. He's done stuff on Ted Bundy, Whitey Bulger, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and a super nice guy. So that was good news. Now moving to when that came out, right before the series in January, what happens? SBF and FTX go down the tubes in the crypto guy. And that caused a huge amount of interest in comparing Madoff to Samuel Bankman-Fried, Friedman, which led me to get a lot of interviews. I'm on Jesse Waters' Prime Time. Here's an example. That's a show on Fox. I'd never watched it, but it turns out to be the #1 7 p.m. show on cable in history, 5 million viewers. So they say that they're going to interview me out of my house, right? So they're sending a guy to do the camera work and connect it. So 20 minutes before we're live, nobody's here yet in my house. And so, you know, they call me and I ask, where the hell is somebody coming? They said, don't worry, they'll be there. Guy comes in, they have to put the thing in my ear. My hearing is bad. I can't hear a thing because it's all muffled. It's loud, but muffled. So we're now 30 seconds before going live. And I had asked before, is this like the last segment, like right before 8 o'clock, 5 minutes? And no, this is the lead story tonight. 30 seconds before I can't hear him. And this camera guy was a genius. He figured out how to send the audio feed to my cell phone through the speaker. So I held it in my lap and I heard all the questions, and it was 5 minutes. Day after the thing comes out on Wednesday, the January 4th, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan calls me, and JP Morgan gets the crap kicked out of it in the book and in the Netflix. And we had a great conversation. He couldn't have been nicer. He had some points to make. Within a minute, he figured out I knew more than he did about it. He started asking me questions. Then I've just gotten back from Mexico, where I spoke in Acapulco at the Spanish version Los. I don't know if you can see it, Los Diálogos de Madoff, which is pretty cool to see your book in Spanish. Even my dedications were in Spanish. Anyway, so as you can see, I've been very lucky on the launch of both things. 100 million people will watch the Netflix in the first month, which we've just hit, which is pretty amazing considering we hope to sell a few thousand books, and to have 100 million eyeballs on television is pretty incredible. You know, so the first question I always get asked, how'd you get access to Bernie and the family? And I have to say it was, be honest, largely fortuitous. I was doing a live show back then, and a woman named Lori Sandell had written a book that Andrew Madoff had cooperated a bit with on the family growing up story, not the Ponzi story. And Andrew had forced Ruth to participate. She didn't like the book or want to be in it, but out of the blue, she says, you want to talk to Andrew off the record for prep for our interview tomorrow. And, you know, at this point, Andrew's one of the most unpopular people in the world. He's not talking to anybody. He's got all these guys after trying to claw back his money. So I get on the phone with him. And we're off the record, of course. I started attacking him right away. You know, I said, you got $3 million from your dad. 5 months before the thing went down. Don't you think you ought to give that money back? And he disarmed me by saying yes. And we had a good talk. He said he was going to watch the show the next day. If he heard the same thing out of my mouth that he was hearing off the record, he would talk to me. And that led to luck number two. His mother, Ruth, was moving from Florida to Greenwich, where I live, specifically to Old Greenwich, the part of Greenwich I live in. So I said, I'll take her out to lunch. And Andy, if you want to set it up, he sets it up. We're in a restaurant, cold December day. We get there before noon. There's not a single person in the restaurant. She comes in with sunglasses on and won't take them off, even though no one's there. Eats a chef's salad like she hadn't had a meal in a month, and disarmed me totally too. We had a great conversation. She answered every question. She was devastated by the whole deal, of course, and her son had committed suicide by that point. And until we walked out, I asked if we get a picture together, and she stopped and said, "You're wired, aren't you?" And so I thought I'd set her up, and I assured her I wasn't. So she introduced me to Bernie, and I told Bernie that, you know, if you want to talk, this is your chance to talk to history, but I'm going to vet every single word you say. And he said, "I accept those terms, Jim." So if you think about it, really amazing, because Bernie, Ruth, Andrew, and Andrew's girlfriend, Catherine Hooper, who was a brilliant woman who helped him get through all of this, also cooperated with me, particularly after Andy died in 2014. They trusted me as sort of the custodian of their legacy, not knowing me from dirt. And in the case of Bernie, it didn't work out too well. And in the case of the other three, I did my own investigation, which you'll see, which is in chapter 8, and I'll talk about in a sec. So that leads to, why did I do it then? Well, obviously the first thing is I wanted to see if I could penetrate in the book Bernie's mind and get inside that. It was unfathomable. The second thing was the Department of Justice, the Southern District of New York, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee, and the media and the public all thought Ruth, Andy, and Mark had to know. I did my own investigation, which is in chapter 8, and it didn't look good going in because Bernie had stolen $800 million through the 19th floor and through the 17th floor, sorry, where the Ponzi scheme was hidden in the lipstick building behind closed doors, up through the 19th floor where the legitimate business, the market making business, existed. And 800 million had been hidden on the trading desks. And who ran the trading desks? Mark and Andrew. And the third thing was to get into the untold story, which is the degree that the systemic regulating authorities and Wall Street completely failed on what should have been easy to detect. In fact, Bernie did not act alone, in the sense that when I put this into 4 buckets of co-conspirators, that the first is the Big Four, which you probably know now from the Netflix series, but no one had really heard of them. And Jeffrey Pickauer, the biggest, took $7 billion out of the fund. You just heard me say Bernie took 800 million. So this guy took 9 times what Bernie took out, and which is really unbelievable. And what they did was they came to bail him out when he had cash crises several times, and that gave them the right to extort Bernie, blackmail him, if you will, for better returns than the rest of the folks in the Ponzi scheme got. The second group we moved to Wall Street, I call the willfully blind co-conspirators, and that's the feeder funds, hedge funds that funnel their money to Bernie. Their only job really is due diligence, meaning match their clients' money and risk profile with the money manager, so that if you're a conservative or something, your money is going to go to the conservative manager, and preferably over several, so you're diversified. Problem, Bernie didn't allow any due diligence, and the fees that the feeder funds get, which is 1% of assets that they're managing, and that's essentially for administrating this and finding the right money manager. Money manager gets 2% of all the assets plus 20% of the gains. Bernie passed that entire amount of money back to those feeder funds, and in return, they could do no due diligence. So basically, they gave up their one job to take bribes from Bernie and ask no questions. Third group, the unwitting co-conspirators, largely the SEC, who did 5 separate investigations and never managed to even find the 17th floor, much less the Ponzi scheme. In fact, they kept reinvestigating him for the same thing they'd exonerated him for, something called front running, related to the market maker that he actually never did and was exonerated. And the next final group is the witless co-conspirators, the folks on the 17th floor, a small group of high school, unsophisticated, uneducated graduates who managed to operationalize and run the Ponzi scheme for 40 years without ever realizing they were running a Ponzi scheme. And Bernie paid these guys a lot of money, again, basically not to ask any questions. Bernie himself told me that he couldn't believe that he got away with it for so long. I always cite 3 examples of how easy it should have been to detect. Number one, anybody that knows anything about the stock market knows it can't go up every day, every month, every year, as Bernie's fund did. In fact, the whistleblowers, Harry Markopoulos, who's a great guy, it only took him 2 hours to prove that the correlation, meaning the mirror of the fund, should have looked like the overall index on Wall Street, and should have been 90% correlated. Took him under 2 hours to see it was 5% correlated, obviously because it was always going up. The second example, Madoff told me himself, which is that the SEC was in his office on a Friday night doing an investigation, and he said, I'll give you my account number at the Depository Trust Corporation, which clears every single trade. His market maker ran all 600,000 of its trades through there. You could trace every single one, completely legitimate. He told them, call that number at the DTC, ask for the sub-account for investment advisory, the IA business, which was the Ponzi scheme, and you'll trace every single trade. There was a slight problem with that. There was no sub-account called investment advisory, and there'd never been a single trade through there for the Ponzi scheme, except the SEC never made the phone call. The final thing is JP Morgan, that account, which was essentially a checking account that housed the Ponzi scheme, the JP Morgan never figured out even was related to the investment advisory business. $170 billion went through that account, and JP Morgan thought it was a checking account of a small nature. Bernie himself admitted he never had more than 5.9 billion in it, even though it was supporting a 65 billion allegedly Ponzi scheme. But again, from a equity strategy, that account should have been full of counterparty payments and deposits, because you need a counterparty to trade. And also, as an equity strategy, over that time period, $4.4 billion of dividends should have been deposited there. There was never a single payment to a counterparty ever, and there was never a single dollar deposited of a dividend. Let's go inside Bernie's mind now for a second, because you would assume that he's running this business that has a great reputation. It broke the monopoly of the Wall Street, of the New York Stock Exchange. He architected the NASDAQ, basically putting together the regional exchanges, the pink sheets, all these things that had no transparency into one computer screen with his brother, and was worth $3 billion at one point without any Ponzi scheme. So you would assume that something must have happened. He must have lost some money, and like a gambler made the classic mistake, I'll double down. In this case, I'll run a little Ponzi, morality problem, illegal, but no one will notice, get the money back. And of course, that never happens. Also, that story he told me, which he hadn't really told publicly, ends up not being true. He was actually building on the 19th floor with top level graduates, leading edge technology then on the street, state of the art, the market making business. At the same time, he was building with high school graduates and 1980s obsolete IBM 400 AS400 server, the Ponzi scheme. Unfathomable. And not only what was it worth, 3 billion at peak, but it reflected, if you cut his brain up to figure out, because he's running these at the same time, which is unbelievable out of the same guy. But psychologically, the market maker fit his personality, control costs, high tech, and commissions, whether the market's up or down, because he's executing trades as a wholesaler for firms like Charles Schwab, discount brokers. The other business, though, involved managing money, and he found out, oh my God, you can lose money on trades, and he could not psychically stomach losing money. So he stopped trading and faked it rather than get out of that business, which didn't fit his profile at all. His brain was compartmentalized. Shrink in the prison told him it was equivalent to what a wartime person has to do to survive. And that fit Wall Street well, too, because Wall Street's very compartmented. You can't have the traders talking to the investment bankers, so the deal inside information. And he hid behind that so that no one in his firm saw the whole picture. He kept everybody in the dark. He actually ran the firm as a family. So there's a lot of loyalty upstairs because the customers and they were treated so well. He paid for honeymoons. He paid for sudden medical expenses, all running that legitimate business. Now, a Ponzi scheme should be easy to detect, as I just said, because first off, it requires more money coming in the front door from new investors than it's going out the back door with your current investors leaving with their money. And by definition, it's impossible to do that forever, and it should never have lasted. Also, some very simple question: where's the money? Who are you trading with? Where are you trading? Where are the counterparties? Who's your banker? Who's your auditor? Bernie had an auditor in a one-man strip mall who wasn't even qualified to do external audits, and who was invested with Bernie, completely conflicted. And JP Morgan even had said that somebody ought to check out that phone number exists and that it's not a car wash. And actually ended up being a money laundering outfit if you consider what Bernie was doing. So the feeders, willfully blind, and I basically feel like willful blindness should be a criminal offense. Right now, due diligence has no definition, and that was manipulated. The big four, because of the fact that they were taking more money. Now, Bernie had a lot of longtime investors that were not high net worth. A lot of people thought that these were all rich people, so screw them if they were dumb enough to lose their money. But some of them had been investing small amounts for 40 years. What Bernie ended up doing was giving them a fake return, but giving the big four guys a much higher return, what I call the reverse Robin Hood, taking from the lower net worth and giving to the high net worth. The SEC, the 17th floor guys ran circles around them. They were all high school graduates. They would do stuff like Bernie would have the examiners in his office, in a conference room right outside his office. He didn't let them talk to anybody in the firm but himself and Frank DePascali, who was the right-hand man who operated the whole deal. And Bernie would call down and say, they want this report. And, it'd be a huge report. And they would print it right off of a old printer, which meant it was warm. So they put it in the refrigerator so it didn't look like it was new. They threw it around like a football and then carried it up and gave it to the SEC, literally. And they never figured anything out. One other huge regulatory failure that I like to talk about, because most people haven't heard of it, but SIPC is the Securities Investor Protection Corp. And that is the FDIC equivalent on Wall Street. The FDIC was formed in the New Deal by FDR, has never not paid a claim and never cost the government $1. It's an independent agency. Now I'll go to SIPC. SIPC was warned 16 years before Bernie went down by the GAO, which is Congress's watchdog, that they did not have sufficient structure or capital if there was a big Wall Street crash. Secondly, premiums in the FDIC are determined by risk of the bank. The more risk is, the more you pay in, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? go to SIPC back in this time frame, the annual premium was $150 a year, whether you were Merrill Lynch or a one-man guy, $150. So essentially, there ain't any money in the fund when Bernie went $65 billion Ponzi scheme went down. And SIPC decided they don't recognize Ponzi schemes because it's fake. Although there's no small print that would have let any investor know that. And they managed to recoup $14 billion, which is an amazing number, without, even more amazing, one dime of it being SIPC customer money. Where'd that money come from? They took Madoff victims that had withdrawn their money over time and clawed back money from them, even if they no longer had it, and gave it to the Madoff victims who left their money there and lost it all. So essentially, the victims were victimized again in a mind-boggling display of unfairness. And so you have a clawback on money that you may have already spent. And how'd you like to feel if you got your Merrill Lynch statement every month and they didn't recognize the Ponzi scheme? So they didn't recognize 65 billion, which is what all their statements would have added up to. They said, no, you're only entitled to 19 billion, which was the amount that was invested originally, some as long as 40 years ago. So you're telling people, can I trust my financial monthly statement and the final statement if the thing goes down? And do I have to not spend any money I take out in case it's clawed back? The JP Morgan, I've talked about how they failed in that account in so many different ways. They had 6 different divisions, I counted, that dealt with Madoff in one way, shape, or another, never spoke to each other. In fact, the only time that JP Morgan ever moved to turn Bernie in was the UK office that had money with a hedge fund, feeder fund, that they tried to get out once they heard things weren't kosher, except that Colombian drug lord money was in there, and they threatened JP Morgan if they took their money out. And that's when JP Morgan went to the UK regulatory authorities, but they neglected to tell the US SEC or their own divisions. And finally, there were 2 conspiracies I saw that the government never even went after. The first is that this was also a tax evasion scheme domestically. All these guys, such as the Big Four, that were getting these fake gains, they created fake losses too, so that they would offset any cash they'd taken out with losses and not have to pay. That's a criminal offense, and the government chose not to go after anybody there. The other thing was, I alluded to this money abroad. That fund in particular that JP Morgan had money with ended up being a fund run by a woman named Sonia Cohn, who collected money from Russian oligarchs, Eastern European oligarchs, drug lords, and money laundered it essentially into Bernie. And the government never went after the money laundering either. What I'm going to do now is show you a few slides to give you a little bit more flavor of how this came. First off, here's on the Madoff thing. Let me tell you that not only was Joe Berlinger a tremendous guy, but Netflix was great. They had 5 run-throughs that they could review this, and they made sure that every single fact that I had in there was vetted. They would ask me. I went out 3 times to the studios in New Jersey and taped 10 hours worth of stuff, and you can see in the 4 episodes the stuff that made it. I give Joe a lot of credit. Number one, he decided early on that he was going to recreate the 19th and 17th floors. And you can really see the 2 sides of Bernie's brain, as that poster does, by the 2 floors and how different they are. I got taped in each one, and I think it was really a brilliant thing he did. It debuted at number by his prison pen pal, which I didn't really want to be called, but the idiot that came up with that, unfortunately, was me, because I had started the article I wrote saying, never did I expect to be Bernie's pen pal, and that's where that came from. What I'm impressed with the New York Post, though, is he simply could not accept any losses. That's the headline that they essentially got out of what I wrote. And it's, I think, fundamentally exactly the truth. Here I am with Ruth, and she's smiling in this picture. So we would have periodic lunches, and this was not the first one where she did not let me take the picture. Very attractive woman, very nice, very honest, not dumb at all. I mean, in terms of being unsophisticated financially, she may have tried to pretend she was a little bit more than she was, but she wasn't. There's Andy, and that's Catherine Hooper that I mentioned. And no one in the family knew anything about my findings in the book until the CBS Sunday Morning. So she watched it with her father, who she said was doing play-by-play. And this is an amazing thing to me. She told me all along, to the depths of my soul, I did not believe that Andy knew anything about it. But if you find it, Jim, I will accept it, which is pretty amazing when you consider it. So anyway, she watches this for the first time. And right after it's on, she sends me a text saying, I hope you sell 65 billion books. And you know where that 65 billion came from. This is the thing that blew the CBS interviewer, the correspondent, the most. On the side there is a typical letter from Bernie. It is actually 7 pages, single-spaced, handwritten to me. Remember, he doesn't even know me. On the other side is a letter he wrote to Andy and Catherine, who you just saw on the previous slide. And it says, I'm sorry for everything, Dad. Not even love, Dad. And that was his apology to them. One sentence. And this is what he's writing me on the at the same time.
How does this book work? Is you telling the reader, because here's what I want you to do when you write this book. I want you to be perceived as the author, as an expert. I don't want people to look at you and say, "Yo, this person is my guy." Well,
I'm not hearing that. Can I continue?
I want you to tell them how to read. So here's a perfect example. I wrote a book called Geo's Gems. It has 52 gems, 1 gem per week. I wrote in my introduction, hey, there's 52 gems. Here's how you read this book. This book was not meant for you to go and read all 52 gems tomorrow.
Could we mute all
The purpose of the gem is to
non-speakers?
study it very.
Jim, you can unmute yourself and keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay, can everybody hear me now again?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, back on. All right. I've been asked how the flow worked in this Ponzi scheme. One, I explained the Ponzi scheme means no real investment activity going on. The returns come from one set of investors to another, and more money's got to be coming in than going out. Bernie's money came from those big 4 guys that I mentioned, the feeder funds I mentioned, and then these individual investors, many of whom were not high net worth folks, went into this JP Morgan account known as the 703 account, which is the last 3 digits. And Bernie said he was doing the split strike conversion, which was his fake investment strategy that, by the way, I never found a single victim or even the legitimate traders on the 19th floor who understood what it was, although conceptually it was rather simple. And so where did the money go on the outway? Well, I said of the reverse Robin Hood, which is the high net worth folks. The second part was to propping up the business. This is the money Bernie stole, the 800 million, through the back door into the market maker when he needed to prop up the whole business to keep it going. And then the final category I call the piggy bank. He plied people on the 17th floor and key lieutenants with all kinds of things. He paid their co-ops, sometimes season tickets, vacations, restaurants, all out of the corporate American Express card of Bernie, which, by the way, was paid for by customer money. The fake trading strategy. All you got to know from this is that this is an example on the equity trading side. It's a specific day, in this case, July 14th, 2000. Bernie's investment advisory Ponzi scheme said it traded 4.3 million shares. The entire market turnover that day was 4 million. So Bernie had personally traded, his hedge fund had traded 200% of what the entire market was. But wait, it's even worse in the options business, because options were a key part of his strategy. This is OEX, which is the index for the options market. One contract, May 6th, Madoff said he traded almost 80,000 contracts of that option. The entire actual market was 534, 150 times the volume of the market. So this was not a small scheme of cheating. It's a little bit like having a car dealer with 100 cars on the lot and you sold 5,000 cars. Not possible. This is what an actual statement looked like. As you can see, it has all legitimate large cap stocks. It has a Fidelity Treasury fund. One thing, though, that was strange is this was printed off a dot matrix printer from way back when, off of that they used. And most people, as you know, the statements look a lot nicer than that. This is what a confirm statement for a trade. He was a heavy trading strategy, and every month, right behind those statements would come these beautifully chronologically in order, all the trades that happened. And remember, Bernie was trying to cover up that he was running a hedge fund. So he said, I only take commissions. I don't take money management fees. All I'm doing is trading. So that yellow box at the bottom there is where the commission would be put. And he didn't always cover his tracks. That box is empty there. This is how he did the laundering of that 800 million bucks, just so you get a flavor. This is an actual movement of $4.3 million out of the 703 account at JP Morgan. He wired it to his personal account investment at Morgan Stanley. From there, it was wired to the Bank of New York, which was the bank of the market maker on the 19th floor. And from there, it went in the back door of the market maker, recorded as trading profits to make up what would have been losses. And this is what people thought the boys must have been, been in on this, since it was hidden in the trading desks. This is the infamous Stup account, which is Yiddish for sexual intercourse, literally, or pushing up or screwing. What Bernie did literally was January 1st, he told you what your benchmark rate of return. In this case, you're going to earn 18%. Now, everybody knows you can't predict what the market's going to do on January 1. So this report would come up and he'd look at it and say November. And right here, it shows that it was at about 9.6% year to date through November. But he had to deliver 18% by the end of December. So they used this file to then know they had to fake X number of trades to get that 9% up to 18, which meant he was going to have to make 200 or 300% just in the month of December to hit that. This chart on the left is the actual screenshot of Harry Markopoulos proving that Bernie's results could not have been real, that he did this full analysis in under 2 hours. On the other side, the red line, as you notice, goes straight up at a 45-degree angle, which is impossible for an equity stock or of any kind to do on Wall Street. As you know, they go up and down. And this is his split strike conversion fake results. That blue line is actually a real split strike conversion strategy that a mutual fund ran at the same time. And you can see it looks just like the market, which at the time was not good. And there were negative periods. That red line, which is his, happens to be the accounts of sterling equities, which own the New York Mets. And that is the Wilpon's actual returns that they thought they were getting, which, by the way, were double what Bernie was giving most of his folks. This is the American Express account that I showed you, where the piggy bank. And if on this month, for instance, Ruth charged $57,000. Some of the folks that were in the 17th floor have $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. There's Madoff family members that didn't even work there. And all of that was paid off basically out of that 703 account. Ironically, this is Bernie's card and he charged nothing. This is the actual IBM AS400s that he ran this $65 billion scheme on that was obsolete by the 1980s. I actually took this picture. The FBI, when they turned it back to the forensic consulting firm, which was in Park Avenue in New York, had put it in a closet. So I asked if I could go in the closet and take a look at these machines and actually take pictures of them. This is one of my favorite Bernie quotes. Bernie never took responsibility for anything, along with not having a lot of remorse. And basically, he's implying that he was a constant critic of Wall Street and a product of the corrupt culture that existed on Wall Street. And as we just to summarize the regulatory failure, the SEC now they went 0 for 5, but the thing is that the SEC represents itself as a cop, and they're not a cop on the beat. They actually only tend to come in after the mess is already made. That's the big fundamental problem that needs to be changed there. I've told you that SIPC and FINRA, which is a regulatory body on Wall Street, both fail. They are called SROs, which is self-regulatory organizations, meaning unlike the FDIC, they're actually captives of the industry, which I recommend moving to the FDIC model. The SIPC, I just can't even say that enough about how ignoring financial statement values and taking clawbacks from innocent people makes no sense. And finally, the due diligence on Wall Street should be a criminal offense. For individuals, I borrowed from the medical profession the Hippocratic Oath, which is the first obligation is do no harm. I told you that I could never find anybody that even understood what the heck his strategy was. And I can't emphasize enough, don't invest your money in something you do not understand. The second thing is don't invest in something that your dentist or your Uber driver has told you to invest in. This was an affinity crime, 85% Jewish, charities and Jewish individuals. And Bernie was so trusted, he was nicknamed the Jewish T-bill for the Treasury bills, full faith and obligation of the government. They didn't know what he was doing. They didn't know how he was doing it, but they knew they could 100% trust him. And they didn't diversify. Putting all your eggs in one basket is very risky. And a lot of these feeder funds, by the way, didn't even tell these people that they were only invested with Bernie. Many weren't even told they were invested with Bernie. And finally, on this point, avoid investments, especially that are equity driven, but that face the market in any way that guarantee you returns. You'll see in a lot of Ponzi schemes, there's a guaranteed return with it. By the end of this Ponzi scheme in 2008, in that time frame, a couple of years before, Bernie was paying about 11% a year overall, which was not obscene given hedge fund results. Another way that he was able to get away with it. But given that these folks didn't know what the heck they were investing in, the stock market overall has done 9% a year compounded for 100 years. And I recommend a low-cost index fund, averages at 9% and sleep at night. Now, let me quickly go through this because everybody's asked, are there any similarities between FTX and Madoff? And the answer is yes, and even some other things. Number one, Bernie was just, I told you, known for trust and regulatory capture. This SBF guy had positioned himself as an altruist, was going to give his money back. He spent $73 million on politicians, giving money to them. He had members of the CFTC, which oversees crypto, even though there's really no regulatory framework, as consultants. He paid celebrities a lot of money. And so he had built up this level of trust. The second thing is Bernie had no apparent remorse. He was a typical narcissist. He felt he was a victim of everybody else's greed and that he had to deliver. This guy, SBF, I don't know him, so I can't speak to that. But I did notice his story seemed to be basically the dog ate my homework. I don't know how it happened. I didn't have control of it. This other hedge fund that was attached to it, that he was moving all this money, customers' monies to, he owned 90%, said he had no idea what was going on over there, too. I didn't see a lot of remorse. And this dog had to be pretty darn smart when you look at it, because he moved $8 billion of customer money, and 1.3 of it was loaned personally to him. And to make it even worse, they programmed the system so he wouldn't be charged any interest for basically stealing his customers' money to use as collateral. So it's a smart dog. He wasn't running a Ponzi scheme because there was real activity going on, but there's allegations that he was manipulating the market to keep the Bitcoin token stable. Because you remember, he's moved all this customer money off. It has to stay stable, the value of the Bitcoin, or all the collateral is going to collapse and he's going to get a run on the bank. Complete failure of due diligence again. Citadel, BlackRock, SoftBank, Sequoia, all major institutions had thrown money at this guy. And then, of course, there were all huge red flags, which was the story behind Bernie. These red flags were missed. Commingling of customer assets is one of the worst things you can do on Wall Street. Bernie obviously did that. He stole it. This guy moved it into his other hedge fund called Alameda and used it as collateral. And then when the collateral collapsed, there was a run on the bank. Bernie didn't allow any custodians, which is an independent holding of the customer's assets, so you know they exist. Well, there was no independent custodians, obviously, in the crypto world. Again, a small auditor and complete lack of transparency. So what has happened as we look at this? This is a failure of due diligence, the same as Madoff. There was commingling of assets, the same as Madoff at another firm called MF Global that was run by a former Goldman Sachs guy. Bernie only had those two businesses, one legit, one the Ponzi. SBF had hundreds of entities, and it was closer to Enron in that sense. Market manipulation, which Enron did, self-dealing with these offshore entities, which of course is what was going on with Alameda, and too much debt. There was a run on the bank when the Bitcoin collapsed, and that was the same as Lehman Brothers. And these other two also very reflective of failures on Wall Street. Now, when this book came out, I said the SEC is not a cop, and I could tell you what they were going to miss next. That I predicted crypto, SPACs, and Robinhood, and all three of them have had major problems. I won't go into the other two unless you want to, but crypto, there's no real store of value, which a currency needs, no regulatory oversight at all. 70% of dark web transactions are criminal in nature, whether it's terrorism, sex trade, drugs, and most of those are done by Bitcoin, no transparency, market manipulation. And I do believe the blockchain component of the Bitcoin world does have some value as a infrastructure for doing like credit card transactions. As we come out to the end, I mentioned those two conspiracies that were missed. One was this international money laundering. This is Sonia Cohn, who ran $9 billion of bad guys' money. Notice that she even looks like Bernie. Finally, throw out all the financial stuff. This is a morality tale. It's all it comes down to. Right path, wrong path. I always come up with this example, which is that Bernie had on the 19th floor legitimate business a secretary admin named Ella Squilleri, one of the heroes of the book, 100% honest, and made $125,000 a year, had no IRA, and did her job. On the 17th floor, her equivalent was a woman named Annette Bongiorno, high school graduate, just as Eleanor was. Her final pay, $678,000 and a $58 million fake IRA. And Eleanor was haunted. They were close friends. What made Eleanor go this way and Annette go that way? And I dedicated the book to my wife, but also to my father here, who gave me the moral foundation that Bernie so sorely lacked. Bernie admitted he did not have the moral courage to end this. He grew up in the shadow of failure. His father had a lot of failed businesses, and obviously he tried to control everything so he wouldn't end up the same way, made this huge success of himself, and then ended up one of the biggest criminals in Wall Street history, and it's nothing more than a morality tale. And with that, Jeff, I will stop the share. And if there's any questions, I'd love to entertain them. I hope you get a chance to see the Netflix if you have not, and I hope you get a chance to read the book. I'll say as well, it's a fun read, sort of like a detective story. And anybody that buys one, I'll happy to send a signed book plate that you just insert inside of it. But I've enjoyed it. I hope that wasn't too much to digest.
Jim, thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you.
It's unbelievable to me that you spent, I know how much of your life and focus you spent on this, and the fact that you're able to generate a book and a documentary out of it, and then be out there for advocating for better, cleaner financial transactions, and a real cautionary tale. Thank you for all of that. So if anyone would like to share or ask a question, please put your name in chat. We're going to start with a question that was put in by Annetta in the chat. It says, Jim, a lot of mention about SBF's use of substances. Any indication that Bernie also abused substances?
Use substances? You mean drugs, etc.?
Drugs or alcohol, yeah.
Yeah. No, not really. He had some affairs, which I think he used part to manage stress, but the other part, believe it or not, for control. That he had some clients and stuff, and it was like part of his control of the relationship. And this is not in the book, and this is highly passive aggressive sick. But Jeffrey Pickauer, who I mentioned, the biggest of the big four, who Bernie grew to hate because he was extorting him, lived basically right next door to him in Palm Beach, where Bernie had his winter place. And Bernie had an affair with Pickauer's wife.
Well, there you go. All right. If you'd like to share or ask Jim a question, put your name in chat. We're going to start with Craig.
Jim, that was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm a huge fan of Todd's Point, one of my favorite places on the planet. I love it there. So I'm a fan of Old Greenwich. There are, oh, and by the way, I love the Netflix show too. That was really great. This might almost be a really difficult question, or maybe not. There are so many unbelievable aspects to this story that just dumbfound me. And I'm sure as you were going through it, dumbfounded you. Is there one in particular that you just kind of slap your head and are just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I mean, is there one that like sticks with you that was just so egregious?
First off, let me say that I in the summer, I jog every day at Todd's Point. I go in the water. I love it. And Ruth used to walk every day at Todd's Point. And she was 70 something when I was dealing with it. She says, Jim, sometimes I jog a little bit too. So pretty amazing. To me, there's two parts to that. Number one, Bernie's mind, obviously. And, I've kind of described it and not even gone fully through it. That's always unfathomable. But the thing that got me is, you guys have seen the Netflix and you've just heard me, so you kind of have this view now. But it was basically unknown the degree to which the entire system failed. And I don't mean failed little, I mean massive. And Wall Street, that's the feeder funds, and JP Morgan. And on the regulatory side, it's SIPC, FINRA, SEC. You've heard all of that. And I had to fight for this in a sense, because when McGraw-Hill signed me, what they thought the sex was Bernie and Bernie talking, and they knew I had 400 pages. So all we want is Bernie quotes, the whole book. And I knew that that was not what I wanted to write, that I wanted to architect the whole story for the first time. And this is why I love Joe Berlinger so much, because what I worried about was Hollywood was going to take this and tabloidize it and never be able to try to even explain the complexity of this story. And damn if Joe didn't adhere really to the book very well. He got an amazing amount in, and you know what? It's so good that people don't think they're watching boring shit. You wouldn't believe how much retention there is of all this stuff, as you've just mentioned, on all the unbelievable parts. I flew back from Acapulco, and a couple sitting next to me were from Maine, and flight is like 5 hours. For 3 hours, they grilled me on the Netflix. And I mean, I could not believe the level of detail that they remembered. So Joe Berlinger gets that credit, and for the way that he conveyed Bernie between 17 and 19, and all the other guys that screwed up this story. So it's kind of a long-winded answer.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Next is Fred, then Bill.
That's great, Jim. A couple of observations. First of all, there is willful blindness. It's called conscious avoidance. I didn't know it existed either until I was on the receiving end of it. And I'll go into another, that's a tale for another time. I'm also Jewish, and I think that I knew people who tried to invest with him. I also knew some people through my parents who did unfortunately invest with him. And he used, from what I understand with these people, a velvet rope mentality. Groucho Marx once made an observation: I would never want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. So they would go to invest with him, and he would turn them down until finally saying, yeah, I'll let you invest. Did you come across that in your research as well?
Let me just answer the willful blindness. It's not that willful blindness is not an illegal criminal offense. It is. The problem is due diligence has no definition. It's marketing bullshit right now. Harry Markopoulos gave me the brochure of Fairfield Greenwich, which was the biggest hedge fund. And it's beautiful. It lists all these risk management due diligence is our value added. It listed all the risk management expertise, degrees and everything, and complete unused, put it that way. Madoff literally scripted the head risk manager for what he was allowed to tell. And I mean scripted. Now, the other part is I asked Bernie, do you think you're a good con man? And he said, Jim, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't like dealing with these people. I like staying behind. And I said, Bernie, the reason you're a great con man is because you're the anti-con man. I mean, you were not available. You were a wizard behind the curtain. You would tell people, guys would come in and say, I want to give you $1 million. Can I ask you a few questions? I don't need your money. I'm closed. If you're going to ask questions, I really would prefer that you not come in. You'll be more comfortable. And over and over and over. And the Jewish, it's unfathomable because within the Jewish community, for a Jewish person to betray somebody financially is like sacrilegious. It's not done. And so this guy has not only great trust, is an anti-con, but he was willing to do this starting with friends and family and then up through essentially the Jewish network. And you talk about this, he would buy a table at a say Long Island Jewish hospital, which was one, and he would say, you know what, you've got this $300 million endowment, you don't really know how to run it, I'll run it for free. And say, holy cow, yeah, give it to give him 300 million, and then bingo, he's just got more money into the Ponzi scheme. So yeah, you're right.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Bill.
Jim, thank you. I was riveted. I really was. How, you've had exposure to what remains of the Madoff family. What kind of toll do you are you able to speak about that this has, aside from the son that has obviously, he committed suicide, but where's the rest of the family at this point?
All right, well, first off, I can tell you exactly the toll that Andy told me had taken. He said that he killed my brother quickly and he killed me slowly. Andy had leukemia, died. Then he got round 1 in 2006, and then it came back, and he died in 2014. He was getting all these experimental treatments. He sent me pictures of himself wired up in the hospital and everything. And I would tell, this is an interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, who assume that they had to know. Bernie spills the beans in that meeting in his co-op on the Upper East Side on that the day before the December 8th arrest. And the boys stand up. I mean, they're both devastated. Mark is on the floor crying, and they get up. They don't pause. They don't move their money. They don't let their dad say, why don't we take a week so I can clean this up first? They went right to lawyers to figure out how they turn him in. And in fact, they then, the lawyers called the FBI and actually said, I've got folks that want to report a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. And this was in the evening by then. And the guy said, well, call us tomorrow about this $50 million scheme. He said, no, billion. FBI guys shat in their pants, literally. So,
Yeah.
you know, so I would tell Andy, so Andy, he leaves, right? Never said another word to his father ever within minutes of being told of this thing. And they were very close, nuclear family. They worshiped Bernie. Never said a word. I used to tell Andy, talk to him for your own closure. And he would say, never, he's dead to me. And then Bernie, of course, outlived both his sons. Mark is particularly tragic too, because Eleanor told me this story. The day it went down that Bernie's arrested, all these older folks mainly are calling in desperate to get their money. There is no money. They can't get it back. She was having to go into the bathroom every 20 minutes and vomit. It was so upsetting. Gets a car, driving home to Staten Island at 7 p.m. Her daughter, Sabrina, calls her in the car. She had worked with the boys in high school at the front desk as kind of like summer interns. And Bernie's only just been arrested. And she says, Mom, I know Mark. He's not going to be able to handle this. He's going to kill himself. And 2 years to the day of Bernie's arrest, he killed himself.
Oh my word.
Yeah, so that's kind of an example of the toll. Ruth stopped talking to me, even though we got along great. We texted all the time. She was very sweet. I suspect when they tried to get Bernie early release for because he was dying, she stopped talking. But so I haven't had a chance to speak to her since the book is out. But I gave her a copy of the book, signed it, and everything. She watched the CBS Sunday Morning. I've been trying to get whatever I can to get closure. Joe Berlinger wanted me to what's the word, like surprise her, sabotage, whatever the word is, and I wouldn't do that, outside of her house kind of thing. And he was understanding of that. Netflix wanted in my contract that Ruth would be in it, and I said no, she won't be in it. I know that, so take it out of the contract. She would have been good, to get it in it, but I have to respect. She doesn't dye her hair anymore, so you wouldn't even recognize her.
Well, Jim, thank you so much.
And Jim, Ruth's living with Susan by Todd's Point, right?
So about what about Todd's Point?
Ruth is living with Susan near.
Yeah,
Point,
that's
right?
not 100% verified whether she's living in Lucas Point or not, but that's where Susan lives. She has an apartment condo with in the in Old Greenwich. Jeff will know it, but where she was paying $2,900 a month, driving a dented car, and every expense over $100 she had to report to the bankruptcy trustee.
Yeah.
Didn't complain about it at all with me, at least.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So, folks, we have like 12 more minutes before we have to stop. So we've got to kind of shoot through everything. Annetta, Gina, Debbie, Allie. Annetta, you're up. We can't hear you.
Yeah, you're
Annetta,
mute.
we can't hear you, and you're not on mute.
Oh, you're not on mute?
Oops. Annetta, see if you can fix it. We'll go to the next person. Gina.
I have bad hearing, but I can't do sign language. So.
Good evening, and thank you for all of your talent. I watched the Netflix documentary. I had several questions, but I feel like they're kind of silly. I just was wondering, I missed the first part of this, what it was like to sit with Bernie in a room. What feeling did you get from him? What did you think of him as a person if you didn't know who he was and you just met him and you sat with him?
All right.
The other question I was wondering is if the family has received proceeds from either the documentary or the book. And then my last question that I want to squeeze in is it true that no one has picked up his remains?
Okay. Good questions, by the way. First off, no one has been paid a dime in the family. They didn't also have any editorial control. They also, as I said, didn't even see the book. Let me on the first question. I'm just making sure I don't forget it. On the first question, actually, Bernie and I communicated via the handwritten letters that he wrote and by emails. The prison warden would not allow me to visit. He called me a security risk. And we were even hoping right at the end that I would visit as a friend of the family, which I was by then, and that would get me in the door. The warden's flunky or whatever researched it and wrote, this guy's writing a book. So I didn't get to spend time in a room with him. We couldn't do phone either because you're only allowed 10 minutes. And then you have to go get back in line. So it would have been a waste of time. He did call the house once. He has to call collect from prison. And I wasn't there. My wife turned it down and he was totally pissed that someone would not accept the call. Now, on his remains, Jewish custom is burial in the ground, usually within 24 hours, right? It is true that his remains were on a lawyer's shelf that the family refused to take them back. And Bernie's lawyer told me this, that he was not the lawyer at the end when they were doing the early release stuff, but he was Bernie's defense lawyer. And that's also pretty sacrilegious. So that is true.
Why doesn't some rabbi go get them, you would think, and dispose of them?
I don't know. And this was true months ago when I was filming. I don't know if it's still true to this day, to be honest. And by the way, I didn't answer the other part of your question. I do have a highly confident and good sense of his personality, regardless of not sitting with him, by all the time we spent, all that he wrote. So I do feel I have a very good grip on he. And by the way, you asked, he's likable. He was brilliant. He had total recall. Great liar, which of course, if you remember, I'm doing all this with him and then I've got to go vet everything, right? But I can't vet this for free like it's a hobby. So I had to go see if I could sell a publisher on the book. So you have Bernie find a publisher and then do all the vetting, right? And that's where his story unraveled so dramatically.
Are you working on another project?
Gina, we have to go to the next person.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, a next book?
Another project.
Yeah. I haven't decided yet. I don't know if you guys remembered the Tyco scandal along with Enron. Denis Kozlowski was the CEO. At that point, he was going to be the next Jack Welch. He and his wife read the book and asked me if I would write their story. And I said only with complete editorial independence, and they agreed to it. I'm probably not going to do it only because I think while it was a tremendous story, the whole Enron Tyco, I think it may be dated by now. So the second thing, but I haven't decided. The second thing is FTX and SBF are right up my alley, complex, blah, blah, blah. But there, Michael Lewis, who you guys have probably heard of, he happened to be luckily embedded with SBF like several months before this all happened. So I assume he has the inside track. McGraw-Hill wants me to write a book off the record on my business hero, which is Warren Buffett, on an angle on Berkshire Hathaway that hasn't been done. And the only reason I haven't bitten off is can't let go of wanting to do an investigative book again, whether that's an angle on FTX or whether it's something else. So I'm officially undecided. A Hollywood director wants me to do a documentary with her, but that's related to a murder story, not business.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Jim. Annetta just put in the chat, how does Ruth make sense of everything and Bernie's actions?
I didn't get that on what?
How does Ruth make sense of everything and Bernie's actions? Well,
she was with him since she was 13 years old. And right when this thing, she was in essentially a cult of Bernie, totally programmed. And when this thing blew up, he tried to tell her that it's overblown, don't believe everything you're reading. And it caused a schism with the boys who said, you know, you're either with us or you're with him. And she couldn't let go of him. Time I came along, she was pretty disillusioned with him, but she admitted she could never let go. But she was destroyed by what he did to their family name. Ruth, after this, initially, before I told you she was in Florida, before she came here, she was living with her sister and brother-in-law who were so bankrupted, they had to drive a limo service to survive to the airport from there. But she was an amazing woman because she came from more money than Bernie, but she was from Queens, and at her peak, she was worth $800 million. If he could have sold the legitimate business, it would have been $3 billion. And she said, you know, I came from Queens. I'm fine right now. I'm fine with having all the stuff gone. And we were at lunch. She was upset finding out about the affairs. And she asked me if I knew about them. And I said, yes, but I couldn't say any, I couldn't speak after that. So I kind of changed the subject. Sadly.
Thanks, Jim. All right, we have two more people. Debbie's going to pass. So Ally and then Keith.
Hi, Jim. The Netflix documentary was incredible. I am going to read your book. I just almost vomited when you said when you just described Bernie, because I heard the same words from my ex-husband. But my question is, it seems like Bernie Madoff obviously was not an unintelligent human being, right? He made gobs of money and went. Yep. So was it so, and you seem to have gotten some psychological information about him. Did it come from him? Were you granted access to something to find out why somebody's so intelligent? I know he's a narcissist and doesn't understand wrong, right? But that would cause him to go, maybe I'm bored, like I need something else to do. I need not to fail. Did someone share that with you? And is this a common occurrence for people who commit this sizable amount of crime?
Yeah. You know, I basically came up by the time I was with my own sort of conclusion about this. I also did interview a Wall Street shrink expert who was good, particularly on, I could never figure out why such a smart guy had no exit strategy. You know, why didn't he figure out a way to, you know, land this thing at some time? You said bored. Catherine Hooper thought that he had a thing with having secrets that excited him. Okay. And I'll give you a sick example that she gave me that's also not in the book. They're in Montauk at their summer place in the kitchen, Andy, Catherine, Ruth, and Bernie. And Andy, Bernie, and Ruth walk out, and she's the last one. He grabs and pinches her in the ass. And she did not think that it was meant to be sexual. It meant to be, now we have a secret. So that's kind of sick. My own theory, though, is more along the lines of hubris and ego. If you look at the stuff he'd written, it'll remind you of Nixon. It was over and over. Everything I did, it was legitimate. The strategy did work. It could have worked. By the way, he'd go through this technical stuff, and then he would say, now, Jim, I know I wasn't doing any real trading. In other words, delusional. He wanted you to know how competent he was, how he was the go-to guy. He could not admit anything that was not right, or that he screwed up, or that he lost. And it just prevented him ever from figuring out how to get out of it. And in fact, the Wall Street shrink is the first one who explained what his exit strategy was, because you know what his exit strategy was? Death. He was going to run this thing, and then when he died, it would have exploded. And that's why the sons, you know, used to say all the time, Dad, we don't know what you're doing down there. And if you're hit by a truck, we don't know what to do. And he'd say, stay the fuck upstairs. You don't need to know. It's going to unwind. And after, when I die, and you don't ever have to be involved in it. And I think and by the way, if 08 had not happened, I predict in my book, he'd still be in business today. So I feel like I have a good sense of him. And if you, by the way, there's a chapter in the book on that, chapter 10, I think, the one before last. So you'll get my flavor, you'll get that shrink's flavor, you'll get all the different things, because it is mind-boggling.
Completely mind-boggling. You have like the world is your oyster and you still do this.
Yes,
Thank-
exactly.
Thank you, Ally. All right. Last is Keith, and we're going to wrap it up. Keith, you still here? You're on mute. Keith, you are still on mute. Keith, are you bailing on us?
Looks like he's trying.
Okay, I found it. Sorry, Jim, thank you so much. I'm not going to take too long. So it sounds to me, and by the way, I love the documentary. It was fabulous. Definitely want to get the book and read it. But it sounds to me that, and what was happening in 2008 when they talked about, the banks were too big to fail. I think that's the same thing that happened with why the government did not do anything with Madoff, because they had to know. There's no way they didn't know. They saw all the signs, but it seems like it was easier to do nothing and let it, come out on its own, as opposed to them actually taking action. Do you see it that way as well?
Actually, I hate to say this, the SEC was as dumb as it looks. They did not find it. They did not know about it. They ignored so many. I mean, even in meetings, Bernie would change his story in the meeting, sometimes under oath. And, there were junior guys who said, like, why are the upper guys, why are they allowing this? Why aren't they, nailing them on the spot? The regulators failed. Now, should they have had inklings and stuff? You would think so, right? But there was no cover up or decision, to pass this thing by. In fact, it's really despicable that the government went and bailed out big banks and sat there its own regular. Remember, they gave Bernie the good housekeeping seal of approval. He used to go and market. I've been investigated 5 times, right? SIPC is supposed to support collapses of firms, particularly from fraud, and complete and utter failure. FINRA was so bad that they used to actually send their freshman examiners class each year to Bernie's firm, because the firm looked like a Wall Street set, because he was so OCD of what a Wall Street trading firm should look like. They would actually go do orientation in his firm. Some of the SEC guys handed him their resumes while they were investigating him. So
Insane.
And let me tell you something, they did a tremendously good Inspector General report on themselves, except it was released at 6 p.m. Friday of Labor Day weekend. And in total, 4 lower level people were demoted in the SEC. That is it. Disgusting.
Nothing ever happened. It sounds like he had a split personality between the 17th and 19th floor. So
he had a
Thank
split
you.
brain. He had a split brain. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
He was able to compartmentalize it. And you're right. If you look at that Netflix poster, I like, they have half white, half black. The book, my book also has kind of like, white and black. So
yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Jim.
thank all you guys. I appreciate for taking the time at night too.
Jim, thank you so much. A wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you for your candor and for all the information, and just for being such a great friend of our ministries and of mine. And come back next month, everyone. Same day of the month on the 21st for Scott Semple, former Commissioner of Correction of the state of Connecticut. And blessings to everyone, and have a good week.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.